The Castle and the Scroll, Part 11. "All right, everyone, let's get started," began my teacher, Mr. Gabriel. He then noticed my expression, which I was trying to hide. "Caleb, is everything all right?" "Yes, sir," I replied. "Just having one of those days." "Well, I hope this class will encourage you," he said kindly. He then addressed all those present. "Today we are going to be looking at what the scroll says about family. This isn't a topic that is discussed much these days, but it is, after all, an important subject. And when we look within the scroll, there's more there about family than what you might think. So let us open our scrolls to the book of Foundations of Training." My spirits were lifted a bit at this, for of all the books within the scroll, this was one that I had studied least. Also, for some reason which I did not understand at the time, the topic of family was more and more taking a hold upon my mind and spirit. I wondered if it was because of the image of Nathan and his two sons, all armed together as warriors, which kept burning within my mind. I was also thinking about marriage more than ever before. The teacher continued, "As you all know, the family is made up of 4 different roles. There is the husband, the wife, the parents, and the child. The great king has given us instructions for each of these. You must know these answers. Remember, it also says in the scroll that without knowledge no victory can be attained. So please pay attention. Let us look at the husband," he continued. "The husband is to be the leader of his family, as it says in Foundations and Training, chapter 3, verse 5. The husband is the captain of his family." Mr. Gabriel continued the teaching, but I was stuck dead in my tracks at the words I just read. The husband is the captain of his family. It was the first time I had heard the word captain used in any other context than of the castle. What did it mean? I quickly affixed my attention back on Mr. Gabriel. "This is why the husband must get his family to castle as often as the doors are open," he explained. "The great king has provided teachers, captains, and mentors for the castle members, and it is the father's job to get his family where they can receive the training they need. Even now in the Younglings Guild, your children are learning about the great king from experts who have been trained in working with younglings in this current age." "Wait," I said calmly yet firmly. The word left in my mouth before I was able to hold it back. All eyes in the class were on me. "Yes?" asked Mr. Gabriel politely. "Well," I said, pausing to clear my throat. I was breathing a bit more heavily than I would have preferred. I glanced around at everyone, then looked at the scroll and took another deep breath. "Forgive me," I said. "It's just that, well, I've never heard this before, and I find it very interesting." "Yes, it is very interesting indeed," Mr. Gabriel said kindly, not sure whether to let me speak more or continue teaching. A part of me desired for him to go on and for all eyes to go back on him, but I had to share my mind. "I was just wondering," I said quickly, "since the scroll refers to the husband as a captain, why don't husbands do the things in their home that Captain David does here? I mean, why don't we see husbands actually training their families?" Everything was quiet. Some people with quizzical brows turned their gaze to Mr. Gabriel, while others looked back at their scrolls. Mr. Gabriel seemed to be thinking through the comment. He then scratched his chin and took a deep breath and spoke. "That's a very good question," he began. "I suppose that it would be good for husbands to do such things as you are suggesting, though I'm not sure what that would look like." "But, sir," someone else in the class interrupted politely, "Caleb isn't suggesting that husbands take up the role of captains in their home. It is thus stated in the scroll. So then, this isn't a suggestion of the great king, but rather a command, is it not? Doesn't this mean that husbands are commanded to shepherd their families?" "Well," replied Mr. Gabriel with a smile, "you've definitely got me there. I mean, if the scroll says it, it's true, and it's good, and we should do it. So I suppose it would be a good idea for husbands to do the things with their families that Captain David does with us." "Such as what?" asked another student. "What things would a husband do that Captain David does? Surely you don't expect them to preach to their families." No," replied Mr. Gabriel. "Of course not. That would require a measure of training that only happens at the great castles. But I do suppose it would be good to read the scroll to their families, just as Captain David does to us." There was a feeling of uneasiness in the room, and I believe that everyone could sense it. We all knew that virtually no husband in our castle ever sat down with their family, opened the scroll, and read. And yet, at the suggestion, it sounded so simple. And not only simple, but obvious. Why wouldn't a husband read the scroll to his wife and children? At the time, I couldn't think of anything better for a husband to do. I wondered how my first 20 years would have looked different if my father had read the scroll to me. It was still quiet in the room, and I assumed everyone was having similar conversations in their minds. "Mr. Gabriel," I finally said, "if it is a husband's role as the captain of his family to train up his family, then why do we have the Youngling Guild? In other words, is the Youngling Guild found in the scroll?" Again, all was quiet. Poor Mr. Gabriel just sat there, staring off into space with a confused look on his face, as if he was trying to remember his own name. "No," he said at last, "it isn't mentioned by name. Indeed, when the great king wrote the scroll, there was no such thing as the Youngling Guild, nor was there in many centuries of the early castles. We definitely do things a bit differently now than they did back then." "Yes," chimed in one of the mothers of a child in the Youngling Guild. "But just because they didn't do it back then doesn't mean it's a bad thing. I mean, who's to say that we haven't evolved in our understanding since then, even to the point where we could do it better than they did?" "Do it better than the great king and his first soldiers?" asked another with a tone of shock and offense. Mr. Gabriel quickly interrupted. "Thank you, everyone, for those wonderful comments. It's always a good thing to think about what the scroll says and how it can play out in our daily lives. Yes, let's move on now to our next role, the role of parents. In the same chapter, in verse 8, it reads, "Fathers, train your children in the warfare of the great king." Mr. Gabriel's words drifted off as he came to the last words of the verse, for it seemed to catch him in a different light, likely due to the conversation we were having. He sighed. "Well, it seems that this definitely backs up the idea Caleb presented," he said with a chuckle. It's sure interesting how verses can read a different way depending on the context. There's no Youngling Guild in that verse, is there?" He then paused for a while as he was scanning his notes. "Well, class, I think we are going to be letting you out a bit early today. I suppose I wasn't quite as prepared as I normally am. Anyhow, thanks for coming, and I look forward to seeing you next week." Chapter 15. I quickly exited the scroll class and went out into the main hall. Caroline and Edgar were there, holding hands and talking to some of their friends. Their faces were radiant, so it seemed. To all others, they looked like two devoted followers of the great king. I was pleased to see that they hadn't been harmed by the archer from the previous evening, but my heart broke at the same time to see their inappropriate affection for each other, not to mention the knowledge that I had that they were dragon breeders. They saw me and quickly came in my direction. "Caleb!" Caroline exclaimed with a smile. "Edgar and I are so excited for our youngling gathering this Wednesday. Edgar even wants to get involved with our leadership team. Please consider it. He's such an amazing young man and just loves the great king and the scroll." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded my head and tried to smile as best as I could. Joseph was nowhere to be seen, but that was normal being that it was King's Day. Many others were gathered around us, speaking, laughing, and socializing with one another. Eric, the assigner of abilities, had a group of people circled around him. He seemed to be showing them a new banner, which must have been hung, for I did not recognize it. It read, "The Castle of the Great King, a place where warriors are made." "And that is what we do here," Eric was proclaiming with much pride. "We make warriors. This is the vision of our Captain David. We are only 250 members away from reaching the goal of 1,000 every King's Day. And as of this past Wednesday, we have 80 younglings attending their weekly meetings. Yes, the great king would be pleased." Eric then noticed me and said, "Ah, and here is one of our own instructors of our beloved younglings. Dear Caleb, He is a mighty warrior indeed. And look, he continued, motioning toward Caroline and Edgar, he is continually mentoring these young warriors. Every eye in the crowd was upon me, and it seemed that they all expected me to say something. What was I to say? My world was turning upside down. 6 months earlier, I had gone from being an unbeliever to an ardent castle attender. But now, that very source of my life, pride, and hope was crumbling. You must understand, it was not the scroll that was falling apart in my mind, but the castle. It was as if a tiny snowball had been pushed down a hill, and as more and more time went on, the more and more it grew. At first, I had a few concerns, like seemingly minor discrepancies, but now they expanded into lacking almost all confidence. My view of the castle was changing. I no longer saw it as I had before. I wasn't able to fully let it go. I couldn't. For if the castle was not true, what did that mean of the scroll? My mind was racing in every direction, and I was ready for it to land somewhere, but it couldn't, for there were still too many questions left unanswered. As I glanced at the new banner, hanging in all of its glory and splendor, I was certain of one thing. The castle was not making warriors. On the contrary, it was making people who called themselves warriors, many of whom could not even wield their weapons. My gaze now returned to Eric and his circle of companions, with their eyes fixed upon me. I wasn't sure what to say. I dreadfully wanted just to leave, but I felt it would be rude to say nothing. The words seemed to leap from my mouth. "Have any of you killed a dragon?" I asked simply. All their expressions changed. "Are we really warriors?" I continued. "Or are we just stage actors?" I wish I had said nothing, and so I quickly left the castle before I offended, confused, or upset anyone else. "Where warriors are made," I repeated to myself. "I am no warrior, but I should be. I could be. How hard would it be? I had my sword and my shield. I had faith in the scroll and the great king." I was by now halfway between the castle and my home. There was the forest off to the right. I looked at it only twice. Only twice had I ever entered the forest, both times driven back by dragons in fear. But now my fear was gone. I was tired of looking for others to train me. I knew the scroll, and I knew the great king was sovereign, and he was with me. I turned my gaze upon the forest, and with resolute courage and determination, I made my way thus. I fixed my shield upon my left arm, and drew my sword. Nothing would stop me now. I would kill dragons and teach others to do the same. No more games, no more deception and foolishness, no more compromising of the truth to make people feel better. This would be real and true and effective. I was only a few paces away from the forest. I thought of my grandparents, who had died by the claws of dragons. That would not be my fate. They trusted in the castle. I trusted in the scroll. I shouted a war cry and ran within the forest, ready to meet my enemy. All was still. I shouted aloud, "Caleb, warrior of the great king, is here. Come, dragons, come and fight me." I continued to walk deeper and deeper within the woods. There was no going back now. Darkness seemed to be creeping in around me at every side. I wasn't sure which way I had come from. It seemed like I might not be able to find my way out, with or without a dragon's head. Fear began to enter my heart. What in the world was I doing? Even Captain David, a great soldier of the great king, wouldn't enter the forest by himself. I then started walking backwards quietly, hoping to soon exit the forest. My breathing was the one thing I couldn't seem to silence, and it seemed like my breath echoed throughout the woodland.